On the bus to school, high school senior Dojin asks an AI why every webtoon feels like the same recycled formula and gets the bluntest possible answer. Predictable stories sell because both investors and creators would rather profit than gamble on something new, while readers happily choose familiar satisfaction over the effort of learning unfamiliar rules. The AI concedes that trendy originals still appear in this fast-moving market, but points out that Dojin himself keeps consuming formulaic stories anyway, an annoyingly accurate read from a chatbot. Outside his screen, however, nothing has changed. The same packed bus carries the same tired commuters. Through another identical morning, leaving Dojin to wonder whether graduation will improve his routine when he has already exhausted every webtoon worth reading. His boredom breaks when a pretty classmate catches him glued to his phone and casually calls him out, forcing him to search his memory before recognizing her as Han Yui. She is the popular girl from his class, constantly surrounded by friends, and supposedly famous online, although Dojin barely uses social media and only knows her by reputation. When he awkwardly asks why she approached him, Yui teases his choice of words, drops the issue, and reminds him that classmates can speak to each other before holding out her phone. An offer Dojin immediately mistakes for a request to exchange numbers. Instead, she merely wants to borrow a portable charger, which makes his tiny romantic fantasy crash before it can even load. Dojin says he does not have one and, already embarrassed, complains that she is crowding him, then defensively asks whether borrowing a charger was somehow an unacceptable question while insisting, again, that he genuinely cannot help. His grumbling gives the game away so completely that Yui starts humming with amusement, leans closer, and asks whether he honestly believed she wanted his number. She mercilessly guesses that his heart fluttered at the imagined opportunity, then jokes that attention from a girl like her should earn gratitude, until Dojin turns the teasing back on her by asking why she keeps talking to him, leaving the suddenly flustered Yui with nothing but a small, awkward answer. She dodges by declaring that Dojin is no fun and would probably be painfully boring to hang out with, while he returns to the AI and asks how anyone can share life built from the exact same day. It suggests travel, but an unimpressed Dojin says that is expensive for a student and finally admits to Yui that he is simply bored. The chapter insists travel need not be grand, and when Dojin reluctantly says he might go if somebody forced him, it replies that he will be leaving right now. Oh, that is not normal recommendation algorithm behavior. Yet before Dojin can process the message, the driver spots something impossible blocking the road, and the bus slams into it with enough force to shatter the windshield and throw the passengers forward. Dojin and Yui are ripped off their feet together as glass explodes around them, while the phone calmly announces that Chat AI is being activated in the middle of the crash. Dojin loses consciousness only to wake on the bus floor with an eerie smile still lingering across his face, then jolts upright, clutching his aching head as the other survivors scramble through the wrecked interior. His memory returns in fragments. There was something enormous directly in front of the bus before impact, but when Yui says she is okay, his shock makes him answer that he never asked. Furious at his zero-empathy response, she tells him to ask properly, just as a scream cuts their argument short, and a trembling passenger desperately calls everyone toward the front. Dojin and Yui approach behind her, confused by the panic until the sight beyond the seats freezes them in place. The driver's condition is far worse than anyone expected, with a massive wooden shaft driven through his torso and the seat, leaving him motionless at the wheel. Dojin immediately reaches for his phone and orders someone to call an ambulance, only for Yui's emergency call to fail because the bus is suddenly outside every service area. Whatever they hit, this is no ordinary traffic accident. Panic spreads as a broad-shouldered man shoves through the survivors, demanding to know where they are, and why trees have replaced the city street that should be outside the windows. The entire bus now sits in a forest clearing with no road, buildings, or sign of civilization anywhere nearby, but another composed passenger steps outside and accepts the driver's death before grief can paralyze the group. He tells everyone to face reality, calm down, and sort out what they actually know. Starting with the impossible transition, one moment their bus was downtown, the next an accident knocked them out and left them deep in this forest. He asks whether anyone has a working phone or any way to call for help, only to confirm that every passenger is equally disconnected and completely stranded. With night approaching and the forest likely to become dangerous, the calm man proposes an immediate search, in which the adults, excluding children and elderly passengers, form teams and scout the nearby area for help. A nervous young man argues that waiting beside the bus seems safer, but the organizer promises nobody will travel far, convincing Dojin that a short reconnaissance should be harmless enough as several adults volunteer. The leader orders everyone else to remain exactly where they are, then heads into the trees with the scouting group. Yui admires how naturally he took control and hopes he will return with rescuers, while Dojin answers her optimism with a flat dose of skepticism. He is more concerned about Yui, whose head struck his during the crash, but she jokes that her skull is tough and seems pleased that he finally bothered to check on her. Dojin's muttered curse makes her suspicious, though the complaint actually comes from a tattooed blonde student nearby who is furious that his phone has become useless. Yui explains that the boy and the short-haired girl beside him attend their school too, then looks genuinely shocked when Dojin does not recognize them. The blonde is Kang Jionu, infamous for wearing an elaborate tattoo while helping at school and rumored to take illegal jobs for gangsters. Exactly the kind of classmate Dojin normally avoids. His companion is Yunria, a model student known for her grades and spotless reputation, making her friendship with Gionu confusing even to Yui. Dojin barely has time to absorb the school gossip before Gionu notices the whispering and calls him over, ignoring Ria's attempt to hold him back as he demands to know why strangers are staring while talking about him. Dojin points at himself like there must be some mistake, while Yui gleefully records the confrontation for a future social media post. And Gionu asks the question he apparently considers terrifying: does this random nobody even know who he is? Dojin seriously wonders whether Gionu is some celebrity, delivering such a sincere counter-question that the tattooed delinquent can only glare, while Dojin meets that glare without understanding why his answer was offensive. Gionu admits the exchange has left him speechless, but Ria drags him away before his temper turns the campsite into another disaster. Yui finds Dojin's deadpan response hilarious and praises how useful his rear camera will be, then criticizes Gionu's personality until Dojin points out that losing phone service probably has everyone on edge. Apparently, he is playing neutral today. Checking his own device again, Dojin wonders how deep inside the wilderness they would need to be for every modern network to disappear, only to spot something that makes his eyes snap wide open. Despite the phone still showing no service, one application has suddenly refreshed by itself. Yui asks what changed as Dojin stares at the screen, unable to reconcile the disconnected status with what he sees, because Chat AI is online and has sent him a new message asking whether he needs help. Yeah, this app has officially entered system-guided territory. Deeper in the woods, meanwhile, the scouting party cuts a clear notch into a tree trunk, and the calm leader explains that he is marking their route so nobody loses the bus on the return trip. Dense forest can turn people around even in daylight, and darkness will make the risk much worse. Knowledge he picked up during harsh military service, specifically in the Special Forces, where he volunteered because ordinary challenges apparently were not enough. The former soldier once believed all that brutal training was useless, yet now he is applying it in a forest no map should contain. He reassures the others that rescue will come and admits his only real worry is the girlfriend waiting for him back at their planned meeting place. But privately, his confidence cracks when he studies plant species unlike anything he has seen in Korea, Jeju, or overseas. With no better option, the group keeps moving under the hopeful assumption that rescuers must already be searching, and the scouts trade nervous jokes about the absurd variety of disasters life can throw at them. Then the leader hears movement and abruptly stops, signaling that he has located something ahead, before spotting what appears to be a human face peering through the tall grass. That should be good news, if this forest followed normal rules. Night eventually settles over the clearing beneath an unfamiliar-looking sky, and the passengers shelter inside the bus, where Yui sleeps across the seats, while Gionu and Ria rest beside each other in uneasy silence. Still awake, Dojin explains the situation to Chat AI again. Their bus crashed and somehow stranded everyone in a forest. All phones lost service, and he needs the AI to contact rescuers on their behalf. The program says it cannot make that call, though it can provide survival instructions. But Dojin ignores the generic advice and asks the far more important question: how is this chat working without any network connection? Its answer is one word that belongs in the webtoons he reads: not real life. Mana flows through this place. More specifically, the forest lies on something called the Karman continent, which the AI defines as a fantasy world continent permeated by mana. Dojin sits in the dark, trying to decide whether he is concussed, dreaming, or trapped inside the most aggressively formulaic setup imaginable. Because the chatbot has just confirmed the impossible. Their ordinary commuter bus was transported to a genuine fantasy world. Before Dojin can interrogate the AI further, Yui quietly rises to go outside, and he immediately asks where she thinks she is going alone. She blushes and finally admits that she needs a bathroom, then snaps that the urge has repeatedly woken her and he should really learn to take a hint. Dojin tells her not to wander far, earning another dismissive comeback, until Ria overhears the exchange and offers to accompany Yui through the dark forest, much to the shorter girl's surprise. Ria explains that nobody should go alone at night, and Yui instantly switches into social butterfly mode, delighted by the chance to make a new friend. She suggests they follow each other on social media, only for Ria to admit she does not use it, and honestly, the missing data makes the plan academic anyway. Gionu grumbles that Yui acts far too friendly with people she has never met, but Dojin reminds him that he also approached a stranger earlier, landing another accidental roast that sends Gionu's temper straight back into the red. Ria jumps between them and demands to know whether Gionu truly wants someone to die over a petty argument, while Yui sighs at both boys for turning every exchange into a confrontation. As she searches her phone for the flashlight before heading outside, the beam suddenly catches a filthy, wide-eyed man pressed against the bus entrance, staring in with a smile no normal rescue party should wear. A passenger screams and complains that the old man is behaving strangely, while others assume he belongs to the returning scouts and shout for him to come inside instead of frightening everyone. That single word, returning, makes Dojin realize the stranger must have approached from the forest. So Yui raises the light and angrily calls everyone's attention to the figure's unnatural condition. Under the beam, his pale skin, empty eyes, and stretched grin reveal something wearing a human shape rather than a harmless lost survivor. Dojin and Yui freeze as the stranger's features twitch under the light, and the passengers finally notice the human head sits atop something crouched far below the window line. The truth unfolds in one awful movement. A huge moth-like body rises behind the face, spreading patterned wings and multiple bladed legs inside the bus doorway. It drives the borrowed head into a window hard enough to fracture the glass. Then other identical creatures hammer the bus from outside, each wearing a different human face like equipment. Their repeated impacts race across the windows as the passengers retreat down the aisle, leaving Dojin, Yui, Jionu, and Ria trapped behind a web of widening cracks. Chat AI finally identifies the creature as a Chanchan, a moth-type monster, born without a head and compelled to claim one, with human heads being its preferred option. Worse, after hunting one person, Chanchan seeks another so it can replace the head again, meaning the faces surrounding the bus belong to earlier victims. The AI apologizes for giving Dojin only a brief explanation, because the monsters are already smashing through the windows in a sudden coordinated attack, and the survivors have no time to adjust to fantasy world rules while glass and limbs tear into the cabin. Chat AI offers one useful thing. It can help Dojin survive here, provided he accepts its guidance. He agrees instantly, and following the first instruction, screams for everyone to switch off their flashlights. The Shanchon are drawn toward light. Yui fumbles with her trembling hands but manages to extinguish her phone beam, even as several monsters crash fully through the windows and flood the dark bus. One wraps its bladed limbs around a terrified passenger and drags him from his seat, while another rears over a woman who desperately braces against its armored body. A third pins a man to the floor and peels back the stolen face, exposing the predatory mouth beneath. The system tutorial is over. Survival starts now. The victim can only push against the creature's bladed limb and beg it to leave, but the Shanshan strikes before he can crawl free, demonstrating exactly how quickly a passenger becomes its next stolen face. Dojin and Yui stare toward the scream, and the dead man's horrified expression confirms that freezing in the aisle means joining him. Dojin orders Yui, Jionu, and Ria to run while the monsters remain occupied with other victims, though Ria can barely process the chaos surrounding her, before a Shanshan lunges from the darkness and drives her backward between the seats. She collapses in tears, certain she is about to die, until Jionu charges in and slams the monster aside with a heavy piece of the bus interior. The impact crushes the Chanchan beneath the wreckage and buys them a narrow opening, but Jionu has no patience for Ria's shock, barking at her to stop crying. As he grabs her hand and pulls her upright, demanding that she put strength into her legs. He knows this distraction is their only chance to escape, because hesitation will leave them trapped among the same circling monsters and bodies. Dojin leads Yui out of the bus and into the forest, with Jionu and Ria sprinting close behind, though Ria struggles to keep her panic quiet while branches and darkness swallow the clearing. When she drops to her hands and knees, Jionu checks whether she can move, then harshly warns that nobody here can afford to carry her emotionally or physically. Elsewhere, the loud, broad-shouldered passenger explodes in confusion and demands to know what those creatures were. But his shouting alarms the survivors hiding among the trees until someone orders him to lower his voice. Yui spells out the obvious consequence. If the Shanshan hear him in return, his temper will have endangered every person who escaped. For once, even he has no comeback. The large man quickly finds one, shouting that no teenager may talk back to him, until Yui tells the old bully to shut up. Jionu almost enjoys watching that insult land, then notices Dojin checking his phone and complains that a useless device is only distracting everyone. Dojin is actually reporting their escape to Chat AI, which immediately asks whether he has been hurt, warns that bleeding would make him easier to track, and explains that Chanchan follow human-related scents. To avoid pursuit, every survivor must control anything that leaves a strong smell, which makes Jionu's freshly lit cigarette an obvious beacon. Dojin tells him to put it out before holding another conversation, unless the delinquent genuinely wants a monster following that smoke straight to his head. Jionu's expression darkens at the threat, but a bespectacled man steps between them, begging both boys to calm down while agreeing that extinguishing the cigarette is the safest choice. He reminds the exhausted survivors that everyone is frightened and equally confused, because they were transported somewhere unknown and attacked by monsters while waiting for ordinary rescue. Fighting one another will only make the next danger easier, so he urges the group to cooperate, stay calm, and prepare together. Several passengers support him, insisting their arguments must end, just as a Chanchan's rises above the tree line, silently proving that the next danger has already arrived. More monsters circle from every direction, their stolen faces closing around the survivors in greater numbers than before. The bespectacled man tells everyone not to panic. They remain alive and can still move, and since the creatures are not especially fast, he orders the group to crouch low and rush toward the narrowest section of forest. Ria suddenly cries out that one is directly ahead, but the leader turns the wrong way, and only then realizes a Shonchan is looming close behind him, wearing the face of the former Special Forces scout. The cornered organizer sees the stolen face smiling against his shoulder, and at the edge of death, cannot comprehend its speed. Before that face suddenly blurs sideways beneath a crushing blow from somewhere beyond his sight, and tears free as a towering, tusked green warrior bursts between them, driving the monster safely away from its terrified victim. Wrenched out of the creature's neck, the severed head tumbles onto the grass and folds beneath its false human features. While the muscular stranger roars across the entire clearing and tightens both hands around a massive, blood-stained axe. With one sweeping, circular stroke, he carves through the Chanchan's armored body hard enough to scatter shell, limbs, and black blood. And a leaner green-skinned companion vaults into another creature with a long spear before it can turn toward the trapped passengers. Jionu, Ria, and the other survivors stare as their new rescuers finish the slaughter in a perfectly coordinated burst of violence, leaving the bespectacled organizer unsure whether he has witnessed salvation or a different threat, because those tusks and weapons hardly look friendly. The scout leader's stolen face lies discarded beside the ruined shell, no longer attached to any victim the monster can use. While the two armed warriors stand over the remains without showing any exhaustion and inspect the unarmed strangers in their forest. Believing they have been saved, the still-shaking organizer nervously tells Jianu that these beings seem to have helped them, but the broad warrior only identifies the group as humans in his own language and observes that Chanchan attacked them. He notices wounded passengers among the frightened crowd, sees no weapons, and decides they pose no meaningful danger, which makes them easy to kill. So, without hesitation, he swings his enormous axe straight through the nearest defenseless survivors. Spattered with their blood as bodies collapse, the warrior coldly explains that humans deserve no conversation, forcing Jionu to shield Ria at the last instant and warn that someone in the group might still possess magic. The warning earns only contempt, because the Green Warriors consider the humans gathered before them foolish for entering this forest unarmed, and Jionu realizes his bluff has failed, curses under his breath, and desperately wonders what he can do next. As another hulking executioner raises a cleaver above him, orders him to die, and prepares to bring it down. At the critical instant before the executioner strikes, Dogen calls him brother in Orcish, freezing the broad killer with genuine shock, then steps forward, visibly shaking but holding his smartphone high, and calmly says that he wants to talk. For the first time, the Green Warriors stare at one another, astonished that any human can understand and speak their language, while Yui and Ria, watching from among the frightened crowd, are equally stunned that quiet Dojin can somehow communicate with them. Addressing the attacker with respectful caution as a warrior of the Great Earth, Dojin asks him to lower his weapon and stops the massacre. The humans are consequently marched without another act of violence into a torchlit orc encampment filled with hide tents, crates, and weapon racks, where beneath the cold moonlight, a stern braided warrior regards the returning party's injuries as a disgrace, and hears the battered fighters lament after their dangerous mission that they cannot show their damaged faces before the chieftain. His real concern is whether they protected the mysterious individuality secured through their comrade's sacrifice, and they emphatically confirm it, revealing that the priceless object now rests far from the prisoners inside a heavy locked chest guarded within one tent. Because the whole tribe paid for it in blood, the senior warrior insists the individuality must reach the great chieftain safely, far from the hands of wicked humans like the bound captives now kneeling helplessly in the camp. Yet the orcs also report that one prisoner clearly spoke Orcish, a fact the braided warrior finds impossible to ignore, since Dojin's strange clothing and unusual appearance suggest he may be a human noble rather than an ordinary traveler. Yui quietly asks whether his phone has a translation function, but Dojin promises to explain later and focuses on their immediate danger, because his bound hands cannot reach the device, apparently eliminating the only way he can continue speaking to their captors. The orcs dismiss that communication problem as irrelevant, refusing to let the prisoners decide what happens next. For humans are their eternal enemies, and only one warrior possesses the authority to judge these unexpected intruders. That authority belongs to Chieftain Targon, an enormous armored orc who strides into camp carrying a huge axe across his shoulder. And Dojin must meet the intimidating leader's eyes virtually alone from his knees as their desperately uncertain negotiation begins. Targon leans over the kneeling student beneath the silent moon and demands proof that this human truly speaks the language of warriors. But sweat runs down Dojin's rigid face because his hands are bound behind his back, leaving the translating smartphone beyond reach. After an impatient pause with no answer, the chieftain says he never believed the claim and grips the shaft of his axe, condemning humans as gifted liars while lifting the moonlit blade with both hands above his apparently helpless prisoner. Facing immediate death, Dojin quietly gives Chat AI a single desperate command inside his own mind: synchronization. His mind returns to when he first asked about it and learned synchronization would let Dojin and the AI directly share thoughts, allowing them to communicate without a smartphone across impossible distances by using the mana flowing throughout this strange world. Chat AI emphasized that removing the device from their conversations would improve Dojin's survival chances at exactly this kind of critical moment. And with his battery already dying before the screen went dark, He understood that accepting the deeper connection was his only real choice. Now Chat AI hears the command inside his mind, recognizes his final consent at once, and immediately begins the synchronization process, which completes as Dojin kneels beneath the chieftain's shadow, bound, unarmed, and seconds away from execution. Targan brings his axe down with terrifying force, but Dojin hears the Azai's voice internally and answers it without touching his phone. Asked what assistance he needs, the student requests one thing that might keep everyone alive: the Orc's language. He looks up and greets Targan directly in fluent Orcish, finally proving that the earlier words were no mechanical trick, then respectfully calls him a warrior of the glorious earth and asks to learn the language of his people. Dojin says he wants a real conversation and pleads with the chieftain to lower his weapon. But Targan instead sweeps the axe through another bound prisoner, spraying Dojin with blood as the man's body collapses nearby. Knowing Orcish offers no reason to live, the chieftain warns because an enemy who speaks remains an enemy, and he selects Yui as the next victim, holding the dripping blade above her while declaring that lies will not work. Rather than killing her immediately, Targan demands to know Dojin's true identity, forcing the student to invent a convincing answer fast. Chat AI warns Dojin that their captors are orcs, a people whose hatred for humanity runs deeper than that of any other race, yet promises that if he understands their instincts, this lethal crisis can still become an extraordinary opportunity for survival. Seconds before the axe can fall, Targan grants Dojin one final chance while the AI offers to explain exactly how to save Yui, who remains terrified and motionless beneath the blood-dripping edge as Dojin struggles to choose his next words. The impatient chieftain orders him to open his mouth, and Chat AI tells Dojin to repeat every supplied word without altering anything. While the entire silent camp watches, Targan declares the chance finished and begins a powerful horizontal swing toward Yui's exposed neck. But the blade stops close enough to stir her hair when Dojin suddenly shouts one unfamiliar name in desperate Orcish: Teharmanku. Following the AI's script with all the confidence he can imitate, he announces that the human prisoners are descendants of Teharmanku. And for the first time that night, the claim drains the murderous certainty from Targan's face as he studies Dojin in stunned silence. The stern-braided warrior also stiffens along with every listening fighter, recognizing that this name carries extraordinary weight throughout the tribe. While Dojin can barely breathe, uncertain whether the desperate lie has delayed death or made everything worse. Then Targan plants his bloodied axe into the ground and drops to one knee before the bound humans, leaving both Dojin and Yui completely baffled by the chieftain's abrupt submission and unable to explain what is happening. Behind them, Ria quietly tells Gionu that Taharmanku must be profoundly important to the orcs. And for the moment, the entire group appears to have survived, though several murdered passengers remain sprawled in their blood. Yui finally understands that their captors have mistaken them for someone else. But a large male passenger reaches the wrong conclusion and loudly orders the orcs to untie everyone at once. He smugly repeats that they are Teharmanku's descendants, treating the mysterious title like proof that the humans now come in the camp, and even insults the Green Warriors while demanding they approach and remove every rope immediately. Targan answers with a dangerous smile, explaining that the orcs did not kneel because they served Taharmanku's descendants. They knelt only for a moment before the watching descendants to honor Taharmanku's sacrifice in the distant past. Targan explains, because those ancestors died for the orcs, regardless of their injuries, without ever demanding obedience or raising their voices against the tribe. The arrogant passenger's behavior in front of the entire tribe therefore proves exactly what Targan expected. These supposed descendants are frauds. He orders the false heirs killed, and a waiting warrior seizes the loud man from behind to carry out that order without questions, silencing his demands with one clean, brutal motion in front of every terrified captive, before the condemned passenger can understand why the useful bluff failed, and his briefly victorious smile disappears. Yet instead of completing that deadly task, the executioner begins trembling and looks down in confusion as an unseen danger closes around him, making the long knife slip from his fingers with a sharp metallic clatter and strike the grass beside the bound captives. During that momentary distraction, a Chonchon lands on the warrior's back and wraps its bladed legs around his head, taking him completely by surprise. Across the suddenly chaotic clearing, the braided officer warns Lord Targan and identifies the new Ecker before it can claim another head. As an entire swarm of human-faced Chonchon dives from every shadow and direction through the night sky and floods the supposedly secure camp, Targan answers by cleaving the first monster apart with his huge axe, sending its stolen head and shell flying in opposite directions. Even wounded, he bellows, proud warriors of the earth are more than a match for Shan, and the enraged orcs raise axes, spears, and swords before charging together into the descending swarm. While their captors are distracted, Yui hooks the fallen knife with her feet and urgently pushes its handle toward Dojin. He grips it between his bound hands, saws through the rope, and assures her the desperate plan will work, then cuts Yui free and orders her to extend a hand so they can move before the orcs turn back. As Dojin begins releasing other prisoners, Chat AI detects an unfamiliar reaction nearby and interrupts his escape, identifying the signal as a trait reaction while Dojin works behind the still-bound Jionu. Jionu angrily asks whether Dojin plans to untie him, while Chat AI calls a trait a fortunate opportunity found in another world. More importantly, the AI says acquiring this nearby trait could give Dojin the power needed to survive before tonight's dangers claim him. While Yui struggles with the remaining knots, her fingers trembling, and finally pulls the stubborn rope away from Ria's wrists. Ria timidly thanks her, only for Yui to insist that helping a classmate should be normal even when death surrounds them. While other prisoners wait helplessly behind him, the large passenger demands release first, and Yui questions whether such selfishness deserves their limited time. She turns to ask whether Dojin has finished with the knife so she can continue freeing people. But at the worst possible moment, she finds the weapon abandoned on the grass and realizes the boy disappeared without warning. Drawn through the camp's shadowed edge by Chat AI's signal, Dojin quietly reaches the locked wooden chest the orcs protected, and now stands alone before it at the far side of camp while battle cries and clashing weapons cover every movement. Chat AI confirms that the detected reaction is coming from this box, making its precious contents the probable source of a trait. It reminds Dojin that Targan and every returning orc already carried serious injuries before the Chanshan attack, suggesting they were wounded while obtaining whatever lies inside and intended to deliver the chest to their great chieftain. Consequently, the AI concludes that the guarded object is almost certainly the trait Dojin needs. He forces open the latch, but Chat AI warns him that survival on the Karman continent requires becoming stronger. And this dangerous world offers many paths to strength, including opportunities that no ordinary person would willingly accept. Inside the chest rests an enormous, freshly preserved organ identified as an ogre's heart. Ogres are disaster-class monsters with physical abilities far beyond normal limits, and their hearts count as traits capable of granting tremendous power. But as Dojin lifts the heavy organ in both hands, Chat AI warns that consuming it carries a crucial danger. He could die because the heart is not merely flesh, but a crystallization of extraordinarily dense, pure mana, which will reconstruct his body from within and subject every nerve, bone, and muscle to unimaginable pain. The resulting shock has a high chance of killing him outright, so the final choice, power or safety, belongs entirely to Dojin. With his classmates' lives depending on him, Dojin silently accepts the danger, knowing that remaining weak offers meaningful safety anyway. Images of the bus crash, murdered passengers, Shanshan attacks, and orc executions flash again and again, hardening that choice into resolve. Regardless of the nauseating taste, he bites deeply into the raw ogre's heart and tears away mana-rich flesh, determined to survive. Blood spills from the organ in thick red drops between his shoes while his body begins to tremble uncontrollably, until, as Fornsna surges inward, a burning pressure floods his eyes and drives every vessel red beneath the skin. Without any chance to catch his balance, Dojin's legs fail and send him face first onto the grass as the heart slips away. He convulses, bleeds from his mouth, and fights for breath while Chat AI confirms that mana absorption has begun, reconstructing his body cell by cell and rapidly increasing the pain beyond anything he has ever endured. The AI orders him to remain conscious because losing control now would let the trait consume him instead of strengthening him, then promises they will endure the process together as Dojin screams, clenches both fists, and refuses to surrender his mind. Elsewhere in the camp, Targan receives a battlefield report and listens for the cost of the sudden Shanshan assault. The braided officer explains that every available warrior fought the invading monsters across the encampment, yet astonishingly, none of the orcs died or suffered a serious injury during the entire clash. That result matters because even veteran fighters cannot normally prevent Shanshan from tearing off heads, prompting Targan to ask about the humans. The prisoners are still holding out, with Jionu using a captured sword to block an orc's heavy strike by himself. Although exhausted and drenched in sweat, the blonde student refuses to step aside while danger remains, planting his feet before the frightened survivors and gripping the oversized blade with both tattooed arms. When Ria calls his name, Jionu orders her to stay back, choosing to absorb the next attack rather than expose her. Watching orcs remark that this human has lasted far longer than expected despite clearly lacking proper combat training, because Jionu instinctively seized a weapon and stood alone before everyone, a choice they recognize as the heart of a warrior. Respecting that courage before both tribe and captives, the orc orders his fighter to kill Jionu properly, granting him a warrior's death. Their blades collide with bone-shaking force, and Jionu's hands feel ready to burst beneath strength, several times greater than any human can produce. As white sparks scatter around them, he braces the sword above his head and barely prevents the descending weapon from splitting his skull. But the orc hammers his guard with relentless blows, each one heavier than the last, driving him backward toward the survivors. One final impact tears the heavy sword from Jionu's numb fingers and sends it spinning in a glittering arc beyond his reach, leaving the weapon to stab uselessly into the grass several paces away while its exhausted owner remains completely exposed. Jionu curses, realizing that no matter how fiercely he resists, courage alone cannot close the monstrous difference in physical power, as his opponent, without mercy or hesitation, raises both hands over his head and prepares to deliver an executioner's strike. Before that weapon falls, newly transformed Dojin flashes across the battlefield and severs the orc's head with one astonishing slash. Gionu can only stare at the classmate who had been crawling in agony moments earlier, while every watching orc falls silent before the impossible sight of one of their warriors being decapitated by an ordinary human. Dojin stands trembling above the fallen body, gripping a bloodied sword despite the violent reconstruction still tearing through him. Targan realizes this is the same helpless prisoner from seconds ago and cannot reconcile that weakness with the strength he just witnessed. Then he remembers the missing treasure and asks whether Dojin took the ogre's heart, already knowing the answer. Dojin turns with a blood-stained grin and says it was tasty, confirming that he consumed the sacred trait the tribe sacrificed so much to obtain. Rage overwhelms Targan's surprise as he calls Dojin a bastard and charges to avenge both the fallen warrior and stolen heart. His gigantic axe crashes against Dojin's raised blade, forcing the student's newly strengthened body to absorb a devastating impact. Still conscious, Dojin confirms that he can hear Chat AI and asks for an honest assessment while holding the edge above his face. His chance of defeating Targan is almost hopeless, less than 10%. Yet retreat would leave everyone behind the monster. Dojin asks whether any tactic can improve those odds while rolling through a blur of grass beneath another axe swing, but none exists. Sliding violently with a bruised shoulder across the ground, he changes the question and asks Chat AI to explain the orc's history instead. Orcs were enslaved by humans for past generations, creating their intense hatred, and they are especially prone to losing control when angered. Before the enemy can recover, Dojin thanks the AI and tightens his bloody hand around the sword, turning that weakness into strategy. With a deliberate taunting smile, he loudly tells Targan that orcs are remarkably sensitive about someone stealing their food, then asks whether centuries of human whips and their ancient chains failed to beat enough obedience into their former slaves. The deliberate insult strikes Targan's deepest wound, sending the chieftain into a roaring, thoughtless charge. Dojin pivots away and asks how the odds look now, while Chat AI notes that he hit exactly where the pain was greatest. Completely enraged, Targan abandons careful combat and hurls his whole body forward, reducing his own performance just as Dojin intended. The chieftain promises to kill him, but Chat AI congratulates Dojin because his survival chances have risen dramatically. That dangerous gamble pulls Dojin toward a classroom memory and a school worksheet asking every student to write down a dream. He once sat frozen before the blank paper, unable to imagine any future goal worth placing on the page. A classmate joked that Dojin would burn through the sheet merely by staring, then asked why he had written nothing. When the boy pressed him about having a dream, Dojin could offer no confident answer. Unlike the joking student, who declared an outrageous ambition to become the chief distributor of illegal substances and proudly called it impressive. Other classmates laughed that he only cared about money and did not even possess any, while they mocked Dojin for spending every day on his phone and asked whether Chat AI was the only thing in his life. The teasing boy eventually softened, telling Dojin to forget the empty paper because he would find something meaningful someday. Dojin quietly asked whether he truly believed that and received an affectionate, vulgar assurance even if the answer was not really a dream. Now, in a world where every mistake kills, Dojin finally understands that he has found a goal. Survival itself becomes that goal as Targan's axe sweeps toward him again, and Dojin throws his strengthened body desperately out of its path. Between ragged breaths, he asks Chat AI what he must do to win, only to receive the blunt answer that he cannot. Dojin demands an explanation while twisting beneath another crushing attack, because the AI's earlier congratulations had sounded like a path to victory. But provoking Targan only raised Dojin's probability of surviving the encounter, never his chance of defeating the battle-hardened chieftain. Targan roars another insult and smashes the earth apart, while the AI calculates that Dojin's odds of actually beating him remain practically zero. Furious at that distinction, Dojin blocks the axe head with his sword and demands something useful, prompting one terse instruction: aim low. Analysis reveals an old injury in Targan's knee, leaving his lower defense imperfect whenever the damaged joint bears his enormous weight. Though Chat AI immediately warns that exploiting this vulnerability creates a dangerous problem for an exhausted student with no training, Targan has survived countless battles, whereas Dojin's movements remain clumsy and inexperienced, allowing the orc to repel his first low slash effortlessly, then send him tumbling across the grass before he can position the blade correctly, proving that one failed attempt could kill him. Bloodied and shaking on one knee, Dojin wonders whether he can even make such a precise attack, but the Ace-Eye insists that he must. The ogre's heart has pushed his reconstructed body far beyond ordinary human limits, giving him the physical ability he never possessed before. And failure now means every surviving classmate will be slaughtered by the orcs once Targan finishes with him. Chat AI addresses him by name and tells him he can do it as he launches himself straight toward the charging chieftain, ducking beside Targan's guard and sweeping his sword low, while the AI repeats that living depends upon striking that vulnerable knee. Watching from nearby, two orcs marvel that the ogre's heart lets a mere human withstand their lord's blows for so long, and even with Targan's existing injury, they recognize that Dojin's unnatural strength and timing are anything but ordinary. Yet their admiration stops there, because the larger warrior remains composed enough to believe the contest has already reached its limit. However much power the stolen heart placed inside Dojin's body, Targan can still see the hesitation of a complete beginner across the blade, and the chieftain dismisses his opponent as an inexperienced brat while preparing to crush the next low attack. Dojin's sneaker skids sharply against the grass as he changes direction at the last instant, selling every trace of his fear and awkwardness. Targan raises a massive fist, convinced the desperate boy will eventually stumble, and closes in to punish the apparently predictable low assault. Smirking above his weapon, the chieftain mocks Dojin's lack of combat experience and commits his attention completely to the student before him. Dojin suddenly completes the low slash, carving a bloody line across Targan's leg before racing past the startled orc instead of pressing forward. The watching warriors wonder why such a clumsy fighter deliberately aimed below the guard, sensing too late that the wound served another purpose. Chat AI praises Dojin for making Targan lower his defenses so easily, while fresh blood spatters the exhausted student's face and uniform. Confused, Dojin confirms that his sword struck the target's lower half, receiving a calm assurance that this was exactly what the plan required. Targan contemptuously asks what one shallow cut changes, and Dojin admits he hardly feels responsible for anything meaningful yet. Chat AI clarifies that attacking the chieftain's leg was never supposed to defeat him, because their true objective had been different from the beginning. Drawing the attention of the Shanshan Queen, a horrifying three-headed creature now looming directly behind the bleeding orc. As leader of the three-headed Shanshans, the queen possesses more than 10 times an ordinary specimen's power and descends it with ravenous fury, for although every Shanshan craves human heads, these monsters carry grudges with a persistence that makes an injured enemy impossible to ignore. Targan's bleeding lower body was merely bait meant to hold the queen behind him, creating the opening chat AI intended all along, escape. Dojin instantly shouts for everyone to run, and the freed captives sprint away from the camp while monster and chieftain occupy each other. He surges ahead with ogre-enhanced speed, urgently telling the others to leave as Yui struggles to remain close behind him, while Jionu guides Ria through the darkness and demands to know where they are going amid the scattered, panicked group. Yui calls for one lagging adult to hurry, only to be shouted down as fear strips the fleeing survivors of patience. Then Dojin's sharpened gaze catches something ahead, and the confidence of their escape vanishes before he can finish another step. Yui asks why he stopped so suddenly, but Dojin stands rigid with one fist clenched, staring into the night beyond the camp. Breathless and alarmed, he begins to warn her about whatever waits there. Yet the sentence dies after a single word. What Dojin sees is not another monster, but a walled human village glowing beneath the mountain, close enough to offer unexpected shelter. Lanterns illuminate narrow dirt paths, wooden homes, fences, and small fields inside the quiet settlement, making the place feel almost impossibly peaceful. Even so, wary residents peer through cracked doors at the bloodied strangers arriving from a forest filled with deadly creatures, and others watch silently from shuttered windows, uncertain whether the exhausted group brings rescue, danger, or pursuit behind them. Yui notes that the place seems too small to deserve the title of village, while Ria calls it more of a settlement. As Jionu observes the villagers' suspicion and reassures them that no one has shown open hostility yet. Unable to speak the local language, Yui admits that they cannot explain anything themselves and anxiously wonders whether Dojin is all right. Inside a wooden meeting hall, Dojin sits opposite an elderly local leader over simple drinks and begins negotiating for the entire group. The elder asks whether they truly escaped from the orcs, sounding surprised that weaponless travelers survived an encounter most villagers fear. Dojin confirms that they fled both the Chonchons and the orc camp before reaching the settlement, drawing a troubled response from his host. The elder acknowledges their terrible ordeal and warns that crossing this forest without weapons is reckless, though he accepts the story for now. After pausing over his cup, however, he reveals one remaining concern, and Dojin invites him to ask it directly. The simple question of where these strangely dressed travelers came from immediately tightens Dojin's expression because the honest answer sounds impossible. The elder insists he means no offense. He only needs a believable explanation that will calm frightened villagers sheltering unknown outsiders. Before Dojin replies, Chat AI privately warns him not to reveal that the group came from Earth, explaining that knowledge of another world could place every survivor in danger someday, even if this particular elder appears reasonable. Thinking quickly, Dojin claims they belong to a merchant company from across the continent, and were its only survivors after an orc attack, a practiced fantasy world lie that satisfies the elder, who agrees to introduce them to the villagers as stranded merchants. When the man politely rises and asks Dojin to do the same, the exhausted student looks up in momentary confusion, then sees the others gathered safely around nearby tables as their host promises to treat all guests of the village properly. Once the elder leaves, Yui collapses across a table, overwhelmed by everything that happened in one day and desperate to wash away the grime. Ria agrees that the settlement finally feels safe, yet admits she has no idea what any of them should do next, while Jionu turns from his brooding silence and challenges the explanation Dojin has avoided since reappearing with impossible strength. He demands to know what Dojin actually is, and the exhausted student can only say that the truth is complicated. Yui cuts these interrogations short, firmly reminding everyone that none of them would be alive without Dojin's decisions and sacrifice. A loud adult survivor interrupts by demanding food, forcing another student to tell him to lower his voice around their wary hosts. Yui then notices an unfamiliar younger boy among the group and asks who he is, having never seen him at their school. The nervous middle schooler introduces himself as Yang Hyan, astonishing everyone because he somehow kept pace throughout their frantic escape. Before they can question Hyan further, Dojin thanks the room for waiting and announces that their meal has arrived. The elder enters with villagers carrying steaming dishes, while Chat AI quietly advises Dojin to let the others eat first as a precaution. Their host apologizes for the modest spread. Bird soup made from that morning's hunt and root vegetables gathered near this poor mountain village. Hyan politely invites the others to share the meal, and the elder promises to show everyone a place to rest afterward. Later, a quiet wooden guest room awaits them with candles, simple beds, stored food, and small comforts prepared by the villagers. Freya and Yui enter together, surprised by how much effort their hosts spent making the rough space warm and welcoming. As they settle in, Freya reflects on the impossible chain of disasters they endured since morning, and Yui can only agree. Completely drained, Yui removes her shoes and announces that she will sleep immediately before her body collapses on its own, while Ria notes that their side contains only one bed and suggests they share it rather than argue after such a day. They exchange quiet goodnights, and Yui finally closes her eyes beside her friend beneath the settlement's fragile shelter. A faint, relieved smile touches her face as exhaustion pulls her into sleep, briefly replacing terror with warmth. But violent images of severed heads and Targan's brutal attack soon return in black and white fragments behind her closed eyes. The nightmare shifts into a memory of Yui rushing away from home while her mother calls after her through the apartment door. And asleep in another world, Yui grips the pillow through silent tears, aching for the family she may never see again. Beside her, Ria lies awake for a while beneath the wooden ceiling, still too shaken to surrender completely to the promised safety. But exhaustion finally wins, and her eyes close without either girl noticing what the villagers are arranging outside. Beneath the stars, the village chief walks alone between the houses, his welcoming posture replaced by the secrecy of a late-night conspiracy. A waiting man addresses him formally, and the elder answers with a serene smile that hides the calculation behind their hospitality. The chief asks whether the supposed merchants have fallen asleep, receiving confirmation from a villager stationed near their rooms. They coldly agree that the outsiders must be exhausted after an orc attack, even as Yui and Ria sleep defenseless inside. Then an armed villager draws a knife and states their real decision. Every guest must be killed before morning. One conspirator hesitates at murdering helpless strangers, but the knife-wielding man insists that the village has no choice, because anyone who escaped the orcs will be hunted, and the vengeful tribe will search the entire region until it finds them. The terrified chief demands to know whether these strangers will accept responsibility when that pursuit brings an orc attack upon his people. Their solutions to hang the merchants' corpses outside the settlement, proving submission to the orcs and avoiding any appearance of resistance. With survival offered as justification, the order becomes absolute, and an assassin drives his blade down into one sleeping victim. Ria's eyes crack open at an unfamiliar sound, confusion spreading across her face before she understands that danger entered the room. Beside her, Yui awakens with a knife buried in her abdomen, blood soaking her uniform as she weakly calls Ria's name. The long-haired attacker throws back his head and laughs, savoring the betrayal while the injured girls struggle to process the pain. Ria jolts upright with another weapon protruding behind her, covering her mouth as shock and terror blur the wooden room. A scream erupts elsewhere in the guest house, only to be met by an assassin's harsh command for the victims to remain silent. As the murderer storms forward with a bloody knife, cursing the outsiders for angering the orcs and bringing disaster to his village. Ria curls against the wall and begs him to save them, but he accuses the outsiders of trying to get his entire village killed. He raises the knife over her and orders her silent, ready to finish the terrified student before anyone else can intervene. When Jionu bursts into the room and drives a devastating kick across the attacker's face, knocking the blade and its owner sideways. Ria cries Jionu's name as he plants himself between her and the assassin, then orders the man away from the bed. When the villager lunges again, Jionu catches the knife wrist with one tattooed arm before the point can reach either student, twists the weapon free, and hurls the larger man headfirst into the wooden floor with enough force to splinter the boards. The attacker coughs in disbelief, suddenly learning that the rumored delinquent is far more dangerous than an ordinary high school boy. Jionu follows with a merciless downward strike that crushes the man's head against the floor and ends his resistance, then rises with a bloodied fist, his expression hard and controlled despite the brutality required to protect Ria. Dojin arrives with Hyan and two adult survivors, demanding an explanation as Ria urgently calls them toward the bed. Trembling beside her friend, Ria tells the newcomers that Yui has been stabbed, sending Dojin immediately to the wounded girl's side. Yui remains conscious but barely, clutching the blood-soaked wound and breathing through tears while the others struggle to understand the betrayal. Dojin asks Chat AI for emergency treatment instructions, and it tells him that the first priority is stopping the bleeding. Because blood loss poses the greatest immediate threat, he presses both hands firmly over the wound without allowing himself to hesitate. The knife had been aimed at Yui's heart, but fortunately slipped away from the vital point, leaving a survivable wound if treated quickly. Chat AI says she now needs a potion, startling Dojin with proof that supernatural medicine exists in this world. Such potions can close wounds beyond ordinary first aid, yet Dojin must maintain pressure while searching for one. When he asks where to find it, the AI warns that Sharam village is too small to guarantee that any potion is available. Outside, the chief advances with an armed crowd, scolding his killers for attacking the women before eliminating the stronger men. Hearing them approach, Dojin places Ria's hands over Yui's wound and orders her to keep pressing while he faces the villagers. Dojin confronts the chief over the ambush, demanding to know why people who welcomed them hours earlier suddenly tried to murder every guest. The elder claims there was no choice. The outsiders provoke the orcs, and killing them is the price of appeasing a stronger enemy. Dojin cannot accept that fear erased every possibility of cooperation, and for the first time he wonders whether cruelty governs this entire world. The chief admits another path might have existed, but armed villagers tighten around Dojin as he asks why anyone should bother seeking it. He tells the student to consider why Sharam's residents live in an isolated hamlet rather than the safer city, then reveals that they are criminals with nowhere else to go, people already accustomed to surviving through violence and betrayal. Several transported survivors lie motionless in blood behind the elder as he claims they were finished off and will meet Dojin in hell. At his signal, the armed criminals charge together with clubs, knives, and spears, expecting numbers to overwhelm one unarmed schoolboy. The chief calmly believes killing a few children will be easy for a settlement populated by violent outcasts. But Dojin pivots through the first attack and sends a charging man flying before the crowd understands what struck him. He asks Chat AI whether any special danger exists among these opponents, and receives the answer that there is nothing worth fearing. However criminal their pasts may be, Dojin has consumed an ogre's heart and drives his knee through another man's guard with inhuman force, having transcended ordinary physical limitations so completely that clubs, knives, and desperate numbers cannot match his speed. He drops one attacker after another across the wooden floor, yet Chat AI hints that the truly surprising fighter is elsewhere in the room. Jionu ducks beneath a heavy swing and counters with precise leverage, turning a larger criminal's strength against him in one fluid motion. His combat ability is exceptional even without supernatural enhancement, allowing him to dominate experienced, violent men through skill alone, and each criminal who approaches him collapses almost immediately, confirming that his fearsome reputation concealed genuine training. Soon every attacker lies scattered around Dojin and Jionu, leaving the two students standing together as the undisputed victors. The village chief instantly drops to his knees and begs forgiveness, pretending he merely failed to recognize Dojin as an important person. Dojin recognizes the tactical surrender for what it is. A crafty survivor adapting the moment overwhelming power makes open resistance impossible. Chat AI explains that the chief has mistaken Dojin for someone with an awakened trait, a status powerful enough to inspire immediate terror. Abilities comparable to the ogre's heart are exceptionally rare in this world, so the elder assumes resistance would only guarantee his death. With Yui still bleeding, Jionu asks what comes next, and Dojin refuses to waste the leverage their victory created. He addresses the kneeling chief once more, making the older man snap to attention beneath the threat of another supernatural blow. Dojin orders him to bring a healing potion immediately while Ria continues pressing Yui's wound in the guest room. The chief protests that something so valuable could never exist in a tiny hamlet, but Dojin simply repeats the command. By allowing the elder to believe an awakened warrior will kill him for lying, Dojin turns fear into the leverage their wounded group desperately needs. The bluff works. The chief hurriedly admits that he does own a potion after all and orders someone to retrieve it. He directs a villager to fetch the bottle from a box in his private room, but Dojin has one more demand. The survivors need both reliable information and a genuinely safe destination, so he asks where he can find those things. The chief points toward Rundle, a developed city just beyond the nearby mountain where travelers can learn about the continent. He insists its residents are not criminals like Sharam's people, and promises that the survivors will finally be able to rest there. A villager soon returns holding a round bottle of glowing green liquid and nervously asks whether it is the potion Dojin requested. Chat AI identifies it as a lowest-grade healing potion, modest by this world's standards but unquestionably supernatural. More importantly, its strength is sufficient for Yui's wound, and Ria anxiously asks how they should administer it. Following the AI's instructions, Dojin prepares half for Yui to drink and reserves the rest for direct application over the injury, while the resentful chief mutters that such a valuable item is being wasted on an insignificant girl. Jionu immediately lashes out, sending the elder crashing backward with a bloody strike before the insult can fully leave his mouth. He glares down at the man and admits that he hated the chief from the moment the betrayal began. As Dojin returns to Yu with the potion and learns that the pain has already begun to ease, green light coils around Yui's body as the potion works, and she wonders through tears whether its numbing effect resembles an anesthetic. Dojin asks whether she can move because they are leaving for somewhere truly safe, and Yui manages to answer that she can. Chat AI confirms that Rundle is their next destination, keeping Dojin focused on the road beyond Sharam despite their exhaustion. It asks whether he intends to leave the surviving villagers alive, warning that the criminals could return to cause trouble later. But Dojin decides it is unnecessary to execute helpless enemies and calmly tells the AI that the situation will resolve itself. If the chief's warning was honest, Targons are already searching the region and will wipe Shurim from the map without Dojin's help. The survivors depart before that revenge arrives, leaving the silent forest and treacherous settlement behind as night slowly thins. Somewhere along the mountain road, a wooden wheel rattles over uneven ground, announcing another group traveling toward the same city. A covered carriage drawn by 4 horses carries a white-haired priestess beside a stern armored swordsman through the dark woods. The priestess observes that dawn is breaking, and her companion agrees, while keeping the reins steady on the forest road. With Rundle now close, he expects their journey together to end soon, though neither appears especially sentimental about the separation. She says she can finally bid the priest goodbye, provoking an irritated complaint about how rudely she speaks to him. The woman teases that his attitude explains why he remains nothing more than a lifelong sword expert, and he protests the connection. Their bickering pauses when she asks him to pull the carriage over for a moment, despite his impatient demand for a reason. With a knowing smile, she says he understands women so poorly that his stagnant career suddenly makes perfect sense. Beyond the trees, Rundle rises as a fortified city of stone walls, crowded roofs, towers, windmills, and a massive central church. Dojin's smaller surviving group reaches an overlook, wearing borrowed hooded cloaks, and stares down at the illuminated city in disbelief. He confirms that the settlement below must be Rundle and asks whether the place is genuinely supposed to be safe, while Ria and Gionu marvel at its scale and cautiously hope they can finally rest within those walls. Dojin's narrowed eyes remain guarded, because reaching the gates is only the first step, and entering safely will not be easy. Below them, armed guards inspect papers from every traveler before opening Rundle's immense gate, proving just how seriously the city treats security. None of the survivors possesses identification or an entry permit, and getting caught at the checkpoint would likely send them straight to prison. A danger chat AI considers perfectly reasonable before asking Dojin to check Yui, who jokes that she wants to post her stabbing online. When Dojin bluntly asks to see the wound, the embarrassed girl recoils and demands to know what he thinks he is doing, then refuses his inspection because the injury lies beneath her clothes, although he insists that he only wants to assess her recovery. Her furious rejection leaves Dojin genuinely confused about the problem, since his attention remains fixed on practical survival rather than modest naughty. Until Yui finally shouts that the wound is on her chest, forcing the normally composed boy to recognize his awkward mistake. He offers a flat apology and turns away while she calls him a complete cleatsko, but her energetic reaction reassures Chat AI, which concludes that the potion healed most of the physical damage, even if being stabbed at her age may leave emotional scars. With Yui mobile again, Dojin returns to the urgent obstacle and asks whether there is truly no legitimate way into Rundle. Chat AI explains that the city itself is relatively small, yet its unusually strict security requires every entrant to present valid identification. And because Dojin's group consists entirely of outsiders, attempting to slip past those guards could bring consequences none of them can predict. He stops alone among the trees and weighs their narrowing options, unwilling to march his exhausted companions into an obvious trap. While nearby, the white-haired priestess from the carriage has stepped into the forest for privacy and adjusts her clothes behind the foliage. She suddenly senses someone behind her and turns with a startled blush, realizing that her quiet roadside pause has attracted unwanted company. Her armored companion remains close by, crouched beside his enormous sword and tending the weapon without noticing the danger forming behind him. As Gianu voices his frustration that their group could survive so much only to become stranded directly outside the promised safe city, Dojin chooses a desperate solution, seizing the priestess from behind and holding a blade across her throat while demanding whether the swordsman is a bandit. Chat AI urgently warns him that this approach is far too dangerous, but Dojin keeps his expression cold and his grip steady. Because his captive belongs to the Karman faith, and threatening an established priestess could turn their attempt to enter Rundle into a catastrophe. Dojin calmly tells the armored man that he has a question, pleased that taking swords from Sharam gave him leverage despite Chat AI's disapproval. And instead of demanding money, he asks how many people can fit inside the covered carriage waiting behind the swordsman. The wary warrior answers that it could carry 5 or 6 passengers, then announces that he has a question for Dojin as well. Chat AI promises to support whatever decision its partner makes, and Dojin silently accepts that commitment as the confrontation sharpens, because the swordsman suddenly lunges forward and asks whether his massive blade can reach Dojin before the hostage's smaller weapon draws blood. The challenge reveals a fighter confident enough to gamble on impossible speed, so Chat AI urges Dojin to bring the threatening stranger down together. Dojin tightens one arm around the flustered priestess while keeping his captured sword aimed outward, following the AI's precise instruction, never to look away from the approaching warrior, whose low stance and enormous weapon promise far more than ordinary physical strength. The swordsman pauses with his eyes closed and a faint, knowing smile, as though the outcome has already been decided, then opens them with terrifying intensity, directing an invisible pressure at Dojin before making the first explosive move. Dojin reacts instantly, pulling the priestess close, as his blade meets the incoming attack and his cloak whips around both of them, though the sudden embrace crushes the captive against him so tightly that he coughs and complains he can no longer breathe. The swordsman continues through the opening with a sweeping slash powerful enough to carve across the space where Dojin had been standing. But Dojin springs over the attack, releases the astonished priestess unharmed, and twists through the air toward his opponent's exposed side. Rather than panic, the warrior watches Dojin's evasive leap and mutters that the result is exactly what he expected. Because Dojin can still move under his projected aura, a term the displaced student has never encountered and openly questions. The swordsman explains that aura is power forged by warriors from the mana within their bodies, then mocks an apparent swordsman who lacks such knowledge. Deciding he has already wasted too many words on a supposed bandit, the armored man lowers his focus and prepares to finish their clash, unleashing a crushing two-handed blow that Dojin meets head-on with the much smaller village sword instead of retreating. The heavy blade stops against Dojin's guard, leaving the experienced warrior wide-eyed that an ignorant stranger could block his decisive strike. Their locked weapons tremble under the pressure, and the armored swordsman realizes that the young stranger possesses strength no ordinary human could produce. He begins to suspect Dojin is an awakened, while Dojon strains beneath the enormous blade and searches for a way to counterattack, asking Chat AI for his current chance of victory as the warrior lifts his weapon and hammers down another punishing strike. The answer remains discouragingly low, because this opponent is comparable to Targan, making Dojin wonder whether the orc commander also wielded aura. Chat AI confirms that Targan used it throughout their battle, although Dojin lacked the knowledge to recognize that invisible power at the time. It bluntly adds that the swordsman is stronger than Dojin, even as the student steadies himself and refuses to abandon the fight. Yet his earlier success in landing an attack on Targan proves that overwhelming statistics do not make an enemy untouchable. Promising to overcome this challenge together just as they did before, the AI guides Dojin through the next sweeping assault, while the armored warrior circles behind him and announces a final assessment after watching his unconventional movement and raw reactions. He declares that the supposed bandit is simultaneously strong and weak, a contradiction that makes Dojin glance back in surprise, then says he cannot understand how such an untrained man became awakened unless even that power was somehow obtained through theft. The insult ends their exchange, and the swordsman plants his feet before raising the colossal weapon for one conclusive blow. As brilliant golden energy erupts around him and floods the forest clearing with the unmistakable force of fully released aura, he grits his teeth and pours more power into the attack, determined to punish the stranger he still believes threatened the priestess, while Dojin faces the blazing pressure with a strained expression, gripping his village sword despite the vast difference between their weapons. Before either can finish, the priestess steps between them and extends one hand, calmly ordering that the confrontation has gone far enough. The swordsman angrily questions her behavior, but she ignores his outrage and instructs him to put Dojin's companions inside their carriage. Yui, Ria, Jionu, Hyan, and the remaining survivors emerge from hiding in disbelief, demanding to know what Dojin's reckless plan has accomplished. The armored man protests that these people tried to take her life until the priestess silences him by finally addressing him as Garen, then assures the furious swordsman with a confident smile that everything is fine, apparently seeing more in Dojin's group than common bandits. Soon their carriage rolls toward Rundle's open gate, beyond which crowded timber houses, windmills, and the towering Carmen Church fill the fortified city. Travelers line up beneath the guard's watch and present their documents one by one, making the checkpoint every bit as strict as Dodojin feared. Beside the halted carriage, Garen admits that he can never understand the priestess, while she innocently asks what has confused him now. He demands to know why she is protecting people who attacked her, and the cloaked survivors listen from the dark compartment without understanding their language. Garen insists Dojin tried to kill her, only for the priestess to tease him by asking whether his anger means he was worried. When she playfully wonders whether he has feelings for her, Garen snaps that she is impossible and says his concern is purely professional. Their argument ends as two gate guards approach the carriage and announce that they will inspect identification, raising the tension inside. But the priestess steps forward with her Carmen insignia prominently displayed and begins using her religious standing to manage the questioning. One suspicious guard still asks what the carriage contains, unwilling to wave even a church representative through without checking her cargo. He orders the curtain pulled back, while Dojin sits perfectly still among the hidden survivors and waits for their improvised cover to fail. With no safe action available, Dojin silently asks Chat AI what they should do after entering the city, and it prioritizes rest. Yui anxiously wonders whether the outside conversation is going well, unaware that the AI is reminding Dojin how long everyone has gone without sleep, before recommending that they gather information in a secure place, since even its extensive knowledge has limits within this unfamiliar world. As cramped passengers complain about their scratchy disguises, Chat AI adds a third priority. Dojin must grow stronger to survive the Carmen continent. Yui asks whether he can hear anything outside, but Dojin admits that concentrating has not revealed what the guards are doing. He decides their best source of information will probably be an adventurer's guild, following the familiar pattern of countless fantasy stories, and Chat AI agrees that such a guild should serve as a natural center for sharing news, jobs, and useful local knowledge. At last, the curtain opens from outside, and the priestess calmly tells the hidden passengers that they may come out now. Dojin steps down onto paved streets while she asks if something is wrong, and his companions cautiously call after him, only to discover that the carriage has cleared the checkpoint as the priestess formally welcomes Dojin and his survivors to Rundle. Yui throws back her hood and marvels at the colorful banners, timber buildings, and bustling streets, while the others absorb their first true city. Relieved that they apparently arrived safely, Dojin offers the priestess a sincere thank you, instead of treating her continued kindness with suspicion. He admits that his original behavior was extremely rude and that he never expected the woman he threatened to help them so much, but she dismisses the apology, explaining that her faith calls upon her to aid anyone genuinely in need. She announces that she must continue to Rundle's cathedral, while Garen stands nearby with folded arms and openly grumbles that he still dislikes Dojin. Before departing, the priestess asks what the travelers will do next, forcing Dojin to decide how much of their predicament he can reveal. He silently considers telling her that they came from another world, then asks Chat AI whether trusting their rescuer would be wise. Dojin acknowledges that she saved them but cannot fully trust her yet, and the cautious AI agrees that secrecy remains safer. He merely says the group plans to gather information, prompting the priestess to repeat the word with immediate understanding. She points them toward the Adventurers Guild, explaining that whatever knowledge they seek will most likely be found there. Dojin resolves to check the guild for other displaced people like them, despite knowing such answers rarely come easily in fantasy stories. The survivors thank their rescuers once more, and the priestess cheerfully tells them to think nothing of her assistance. She hopes they find what they need as Dojin leads Yui, Gionu, Ria, Hyane, and the remaining companions deeper into the city. Once the group disappears into the crowd, Garen confirms that they are gone and the priestess quietly agrees. With Rundle reached, she tells Garen the mercenary that their shared road should end here, addressing him with an amused smile, and he admits that although their journey was brief, it proved surprisingly entertaining, a feeling she warmly returns. Garen walks away beneath his huge sword and raises one hand in farewell, hoping they meet again if an opportunity arises, while the priestess answers with a blessing before continuing alone toward Rundle's immense brick cathedral. Inside the church, an older clergyman in white vestments waits beneath the vaulted ceiling and welcomes the returning woman, formally addressing her as Priestess Elian and finally revealing the identity of the stranger who carried Dojin's group through Rundle's gates. Elian approaches the older man as Priest Thomas and says she has something important to report about the travelers she encountered outside Rundle. She reveals that she received a divine oracle, and Thomas gravely confirms that the conclusion she drew from it is correct, because Dojin and the other survivors are indeed the foretold people who crossed into Carmen from another world. Thomas declares that the predicted event has finally begun and urgently asks where the otherworlders have gone, while Elian explains that they should be heading toward the Adventurers Guild, apparently confident that they have nothing to fear. Elsewhere, a guard's spear suddenly rises beneath Dojin's chin in the middle of Rundle, stopping the unsuspecting group cold, as Thomas's assurance takes on a darker meaning. The churchman has already summoned the city guards to intercept the travelers. The armed officer identifies them as unknown individuals suspected of entering Rundle without submitting to identity verification, then names them as the primary suspects in the Sharam village mass murder case, linking their recent battle to a serious crime. With a spear pressed against his throat, Dojin hears that the entire group is under arrest, and even Chat AI admits it never predicted this reversal. Elian reflects that cruelty sealed the Suitsiders' fate from the moment they arrived, while Chat AI warns Dojin to remain alert, because guards now surround every survivor and intend to imprison them in Rundle's infamous dungeon just as their true destiny begins. Spears close around the sweating Dojin as an officer orders everyone bound, leaving Chat AI unable to see any path through which they can presently survive.